This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com in review. What I'm looking at today is 2019's Wretched, directed by Brett and Drew Pearce. And this is a really good movie. For me, it very much evoked memories of movies like Poltergeist and Fright Night, the latter in particular. The story revolves around a witch who eats children. Every 35 years she turns up, eats a child, and pretty much vanishes again until this hunger arises. And she's doing this in a resort town, which is to say that the residents constantly shift. So it's really hard for anyone to really get a bead on her activities. So the premise of this movie is pretty interesting. And I forgot to mention, by the way, it also is a bit evocative of William Friedkin's The Guardian, though still more Fright Night than anything else. And that's not a bad thing, because if you've seen Fright Night, it's a pretty excellent movie. Though I guess its only real problem are two. First off, it has a bit of a twist at the end, which is very M. Night Shyamalan-ish in its execution, which isn't to say that it's badly done, but it's a little irritating. I personally didn't like it, and I don't think it was necessary because what preceded it was so strong. Another thing that bothered me about it was that in the twist department, we come to learn that the witch has been preying on, and another thing also in the twist department is that we come to learn that the witch has been preying upon the main antagonist of the story by this ability she has to cloud men's minds, kind of like the Shadow, in the sense that she would take children by making their parents not see them anymore. So literally, the child is invisible to you. The story doesn't say this specifically, but I get the feeling that you don't even remember having a child. The child is gone, even if the child is present. And this goes back to that problem I mentioned. Namely, the movie has a vanished child interacting with people who can't see them. This is odd. And I understand this is done by witchcraft, but at the same time, the child doesn't seem particularly bothered by it. And it just doesn't make any sense, really. I understand what they were trying to do, but the idea that the child, who has been rendered essentially non-existent, doesn't seem to respond particularly bad to that happening to them is a bit off-putting, and it doesn't really make sense narratively either, for that matter. Though those are relatively minor complaints. It's a good-looking movie. It's a very practical movie. There is CGI, but it has a very minimal presence. For the most part, the witch and her doings are very much practical effects, and that works really well. And I mentioned earlier that it's very much like Fright Night, mainly in the sense that a young person, our antagonist, believes something very unusual is happening in his neighborhood and begins to investigate. Bad things follow. It's not a new formula, but that's the thing, it doesn't have to be. It's novel enough, visually speaking, and it's presented in an interesting way. And speaking of the way this movie is presented, it has a very Spielbergian look and feel to it, which is interesting. I mean, I'm not talking by any stretch budgetary-wise. It doesn't look terribly expensive. It looks good, it looks cinematic. It doesn't necessarily look that expensive, though. That being the case, it has certain touchstones that you typically see in a Steven Spielberg feature, which is not a bad thing. It comes off more as a homage than stealing anything outright. When all is said and done, The Wretched is a really interesting movie. Visually, it's very beautiful, Spielbergian, almost Dean Cundey-esque in some ways. And in fact, I think it's a great entry-level movie for children. And I know that sounds odd, but you have to keep in mind something. Growing up, I used to watch things like The Blood on Satan's Claw, which is one of my favorites, Arnold, all sorts of horror movies. So as a young person, I was really into them. And The Wretched would probably be a good first horror movie for some child that's really into them. It's scary, but not too scary. It has violent moments, but not too violent. It has some great practical effects, and I think children can appreciate that type of thing. So if you haven't seen The Wretched, check it out. It's well worth your time. This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and review. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like or a follow. Peace.